pensions, titled The Untouchables, a look at local retirement systems protected by state law. My name is James Quintero. I'm the director of the Center for Local Governance at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I'll be your moderator today. And off to my right, I have a very esteemed panel of experts. These fine gentlemen know pensions inside and out. But before we get to them, I want to quickly set the stage for today's discussion. Now, for better or worse, about a dozen local retirement systems in 7 major metropolitans around Texas have successfully petitioned the state to have either some or all of their pension plans codified in state law. Now, some of the commonly codified elements include things like benefit levels, contribution rates, the composition of their boards. And so this kind of setup raises some interesting questions, such as, by locking in these systems into state law, are we locking out community stakeholders? Is the absence of local control a positive or a negative for the sustainability of these systems? And then if local control is restored next session, is there further reform that's needed that's needed to restore the sustainability of the systems over the long haul? And so to help me answer some of these questions, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, who I've had the pleasure of testifying in front of many times before in the House Pension Committee, very much a subject matter expert. Representative Roberto Alonzo was officially sworn in to start his 8th two-year term as a Texas State Representative for House District 104 in January 2013. When he was first elected, Representative Alonzo made history by becoming the first Mexican-American from North Texas elected to the legislature, outdistancing his opponent by a 2-to-1 margin with over 66% of the vote. If you would, please help me welcome Representative Roberto Alonzo.
Actually, I'm in my 9th term and working on my 10th term. But in between, I took a 6-year vacation. Kind of what happens in the election process. You win, you win, you lose, you lose, you lose, you take a vacation. So I took a 6-year vacation and decided, actually, my wife gave me permission to run again. Actually, what was happening is the time was coming up. I was on the phone talking to precinct chairs. And my wife says, "What are you doing? You look like you're campaigning. You said you weren't going to run unless I said okay." And I said, "Well, that is true, but I'm getting ready for when you say okay." So it's a pleasure to be here with you folks. I can tell this organization has my deepest respect, and especially crime. I've been working on criminal justice issues for years, and one of the things that I've seen evolve with the organization, some great folks that you have, like Mark Levin in this organization, is going from what was used to be called, or probably still called, tough on crime to being smart on crime. And that's how I kind of look at pensions. It's not the untouchable, it's not being tough on pensions, but being smart on pensions, from my perspective. I've been on the Pensions Committee the last 2 sessions, and I can tell you, as I came in to requesting this committee, from my understanding, there was over 50 members applying for the 7-member committee. And as you recall, prior to 3 years ago, in Wisconsin, Ohio, there was a big debate about pensions, and there still is in Illinois and around the country. And the way I looked at it was the topic. It looked like the sky was falling, what I like to say, the sky was falling. And in the end, as we come to Texas, we don't like to look at things as the sky is falling. We like to do things which would work out. And in addition to that, I can tell you, I am probably the most Democrat. And I've been a 7-time national delegate I'm on the executive committee of the Democratic Party. I've been head of the Mexican American Democrats, and so forth and so on. But as I came in '93, I was told that I was going to vote with Republicans. And I go, me, vote with Republicans? How can that be? Well, what you learn when you get in that building, when you're doing the off process, which is election time, it's very contentious, it's very, partisan, we, I think, say bad words about each other sometimes, But when you come to Austin in session, we gotta, think about what are we gonna do? And not look at it in red and blue lenses, bipartisan. I voted for every Republican speaker that's run. In fact, that becomes a debate during our primaries, who votes Republican, who votes Democrat. And I go, if you want to look at me, I voted for a Republican speaker, both Craddock and Strauss. And when Laney was there, I voted for him. So I say that as we move into the discussion on pensions, I like to look at it as a bipartisan fashion, what's good for Texas, and look at, and like I said, with a tone of what's smart, being smart on pensions, similar to the concept that you follow on crime, which is being smart on crime. And, folks, you know that more than I do about what it is. So in making my opening comments as it relates to the topic at hand, I think part of our big discussion starts off with talking about Houston. And we have a representative from Houston that's going to talk about it. And then we'll have 2 points of view on what's going on. And also, in this year's session, we had a discussion regarding that and the costs associated with and the best way to govern those plans. But as we observed, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to determine the best way to govern certain local pensions. Currently, as Houston has 3 pension plans that are governed in 2 different ways. Houston Police and municipal pensions are governed by a system of meet and confer, which allows modification in pension plan design, including changes to contribution rates, benefit levels, and board composition. Part of what we saw is, as was commented in the introduction, I think we have a framework, how do we deal with pensions, but my position is every local pension can find a way amongst themselves, sitting down to talk about it, to come with the best result for it. In addition, another area that we looked at in this past session, there was a bipartisan agreement to address severe underfunding of the employee retirement system of Texas. The legislature did not resolve the state's pension crisis without input from many stakeholders. We used teamwork from all parties to draft the best plan possible. By reaching an agreement to increase both the employee contribution rates to a total of 19.5%, the legislature was able to bring the system to actuarial soundness for the first time since 2002. With a 32-year amortization period, the state is now positioned to pay off its pension debt in 32 years. The success with ERS shows that pension plans that work with their stakeholders can achieve financial stability. Therefore, before the legislature considers removing local systems from state law, in effect, removing stakeholder participation from pension governing bodies, along with local government, we should figure out if the problems are unique to 1 or 2 local plans, or if there's a systematic issue for all plans with similar governing structures. We all know the issue of debt must be addressed to ensure that there is continued investment in Texas so we can continue to enjoy the highest bond ratings that Wall Street has assigned us. We continue to lead the nation in job growth and provide a sound working environment with opportunities for all. Texas will continue to be the best place for people to live. The people covered under the state plan and local pension plan are a large part of making that happen, and the benefit to all Texans will be taking care of what matters most in jobs and long-term financial security of teachers, state employees, firefighters, police, and many others who take care of us every day. All options should be on the table. We should continue to have the political will to make the changes to make sense while remaining true to our commitment. And I'll tell you folks, As I said, I take a particular interest, and as I mentioned, many were interested as well. And kind of at the personal level, I'm 59 years old. I don't know if you can tell, because I don't look 59, right?
No.
But I've been married 31 years, and there's a couple of stories that kind of reminds me of what this whole issue of pensions is all about. One is from college. I think in college there was a thing called the MRS degree. You guys ever heard that? Okay. I had no clue, but now that I'm on pensions, I kind of get it. But the other personal deal is this. I told my mother-in-law, I go, ma'am, if I die, your daughter gets a pension and health care for life. And my mother-in-law responded in Spanish. She went like this, And so I went to my wife, who thinks like my mother-in-law, and I said, Silvana, I told your mom, if I die right now, you get a pension and health care for life. And she responded in Spanish, And my wife, who thinks like my mother-in-law, said, well, Roberto, you're not supposed to get applause for something you're supposed to do. You guys get it? Okay. Been married 31 years. I'm still working on it. But in a nutshell, I can tell you, I think we should do what's right. As I mentioned, part of coming to this organization, it reminds me of your concept of being smart on crime, and I think we should be smart on pensions. Thank you very much. Oh, since I have 30 seconds left, I just wanted to mention this. I got this press release from ERS, and they said that it's dated January 5th, 2016, and I wanted to publicly mention it. It says that the Public Pension Coordinating Council, a group of 3 national associations that represent more than 500 public retirement systems and administrators, recently awarded the Employees Retirement Systems of Texas with the 2015 Public Pension Standards Award for funding and administration. To receive this recognition, ERS had to meet standards in such areas: comprehensive benefit program, actuarial evaluation, audit, investment policies, communication, funding ratio, and contribution rates. Just saying. Thank you. You can applaud.
Good stuff, sir, good stuff. Our next panelist is very well versed on public pensions and pension reforms in general. Representative Murphy, Jim Murphy, represents District 133, which is West Houston. He serves as chairman of the House Committee on Corrections and is a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. He has earned awards from organizations including the Texas Association of Business, National Coalition for Capital, Texas Right to Life, and the Texas Conservative Coalition. If you would, please help me welcome Representative Jim Murphy.
Good morning, and this is certainly a complicated and challenging issue, which tells me that you're either optimist or have found the wrong room to be here today. Our local pensions, we have a few of them that are treated very differently than some others, and I want to talk about that for a few minutes. If I were asked to provide an alternate title for this presentation or what we're trying to achieve, I would call it Doing Your Own Root Canal, right? How pain and suffering can lead to avoiding catastrophic failure, which is sort of what we sought to do last session. We had the pain and suffering, but the good news is the patient survived, even though the operation failed, and we're ready for 2.0. So I want to talk about, in the next few minutes, really sort of what I see as the problem. I want to define that, if you will. Talk about what we experienced last session and maybe a little bit about what we see coming forward. I certainly want to recognize you, James, and TPPF for your efforts, not just today, trying to cast light on this little dark recess of government, but also for your efforts in the past session, trying to do something right and put all our pension plans on equal footing. I also want to acknowledge my colleague, Roberto Alonso, who, although we don't agree on all this pension stuff, we work together, we talk to each other, we listen to each other, and I think he's a a great example of the kind of folks that we have in the House. So let's start with what's the problem? What's the beef with the current system? This is not about ERS, TRS. Those are state-controlled systems for state employees, and it's appropriate to have the state control them. What we're talking about are a few, 13 out of close to 100, pension plans that are local pensions for local employees funded by local taxpayers that are controlled by the state. A little bit different. Now, some people will tell you the issue is the level of benefits people receive, that the benefits are too generous, they're unlike anything in the private sector, and that may be true, but that's not really what I'm concerned about. Others will tell you that, well, it's the type of plan they have. It's the defined benefit plan puts all the risk on the taxpayers, that if the plan has bad investment decisions and chooses risky investments, or if the market goes south, the taxpayers are on the hook to make them whole because they've promised them some incredible level of benefits. I don't think the plan is the issue. People want to move to a defined contribution plan, and we all know that as like the 401k style plan, but that really to me isn't the issue. It's not how much they get or the type of plan they choose. It's the structural design of the system. And what I mean by that is you have a group of disinterested, non-paying individuals, that is to say your legislators from across the state, telling local taxpayers what to do, how to pay their people. And that is a strange situation where the state is putting in zero money. The state puts in no money into these local pensions, but wants to have the control. That sort of sounds like D.C. perhaps, Moscow to others, more paranoid. But largely, that is what these pensions have to do. So what I sought to achieve last session, what I still support, is the concept of local control. My father, Bob, very wise man, once told me that if it's none of your money, it's none of your business. And my thought is that shouldn't city councils, local city councils, be empowered to choose what level of benefit they want to provide and what type of plan they want to provide that best fits their needs for their communities? I mean, think about it. If you have a very young police force, for instance, you're interested in high pay early on because you're a young guy and you're trying to get ahead. If you have a bunch of people looking towards retirement, you want older group, you may want to load up that plan. So each community really should have that ability to make those choices. So Roberto, let's talk about Houston. Houston's one of those 7 cities, 13 plans, that is under this state control issue. So give some numbers, not to go too far in the weeds, but just to understand the scale of this. The city, prior to this year's CAFR, Consolidated Annual Financial Report, the city is only required to show a portion of its pension liability, about $1.2 billion on its financial statements. The pension actuaries, however, were reporting at about a $3.2 billion deficit. The city's most recent CAFR was just released like a week ago, maybe less. I think what day it is. So, yeah, it was New Year's Eve, a week ago. So according to their new report, taxpayers actually owe their employees, that's what Houston owes, over $5 billion over and above what is in the pension trust funds. That's about equal to the entire city of Houston budget. The cost of pensions last year in Houston was $689 million, about 15% of the city's budget, more than the budgets of Public Works, Solid Waste, Housing, Community Affairs, Parks and Library combined. The legislative changes the state have made over the year have produced 2 different effects, and they're each important. The first is the crowd-out effect, where other budgets are reduced to make up for the contribution. Road repairs, police, libraries, these are good and nice things to have, but the pension payments are an obligation. You have to make those. The second is the ratcheting effect when you have state control. Benefits just go up and up. And why not, I ask you? The people who vote on them don't have to fund them or experience the downside of a growing expense. we looked at, bless you, we looked at about 50 or so bills passed since 1987 for Houston's pensions. Increases occurred in adding the DROP program, the Deferred Retirement Option Plan, upping the COLA amount and increased rate, accelerating the multiplier for higher benefits sooner, allowing benefits to continue to grow up to 40 years in service instead of capping them at 30, increasing the death benefit and the payout percentage, and allowing the city, in some cases, to pay the contributions of its employees. The only reduction we could find was reducing the number of years it takes to earn a pension. That's not really a reduction. It's possible that there were reductions we missed, or perhaps via local agreement, but I doubt it. In any case, the balance is quite clear. This is a system that does not work for the taxpayers. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it doesn't work for the taxpayers. In fact, it barely involves them or even acknowledges their existence. Now, look, none of these benefit increases of themselves are wrong. We simply have the wrong people making those decisions. Houston's not alone. According to the most recent data from the Pension Review Board, our state board, Dallas has an unfunded liability of $1.8 billion, and Fort Worth is at $1.2 billion. These are last year's numbers, and when their new CAFRs come out, and they may have, I just haven't gotten them from the PRB, they will be significantly higher underfunded amounts. So the political environment for this change and for pension reform is really not favorable across the nation. Last year, San Diego, James, you know this, the voters decided via petition that called an election to move their plan to a defined contribution plan. They had an election. The state pension board refused to recognize the results of that and instead cited the primacy of a meet and confer agreement. Now, of course, this is being litigated, but that precedent is pretty significant, pretty chilling. When do taxpayers get to determine their own obligations? I was asked to talk about last session briefly, and I think, Roberto, we need to have a legislative coroner to explain how bills died, because there are many causes of death, and we're not really sure. But some things I will offer to you is our environment, which is not California, is a little bit different. Republicans don't want to be seen as being soft on crime or against first responders. Democrats want to be supportive of labor. Plus, we all like to be nice and say yes to people, and it's not our money, so there you go. Most importantly, we do not have a widespread understanding of the issue's scale or impact, or an appreciation that our status quo usurps local control. Thank you, $5. So, now, and the point about this is really simple. When we in the legislative process, you know, the status quo always has momentum behind it. We're, you know, physics and entropy, a body at rest tends to stay at rest. And so people go, well, Jim, that's how the system is. Well, if we came to Austin today and said, hey, I got an idea, let's control all these cities' pension plans by taking them over, we'd have a revolution. But because it's a status quo, well, nobody wants to mess with it. Well, whatever reasons we had to take years ago or unknown to me, we have to look at the results of this experiment and ask ourselves, does it make sense to continue down this path? Here's what our system has produced. While all pension plans in Texas have a combined contribution rate of about 30%, locally controlled plans have about 3% more coming from employees and about 3% less coming from employers. There's a 6% differential between the locally controlled plans and the state controlled plans. That 6% right there would pretty much put all these insolvent plans into solvency overnight. I'm not suggesting we do that. What I'm saying is this is how it's worked. 2 minutes, thank you. So I will encourage you, TPPF has put together a great policy paper. I don't know if it's provided in the room or somewhere, James, but I'd really encourage you to read that. They've done some really good research to document the facts of how these things have come to play. And I really think it's these facts that we need to center on. You know, we're going to interpret them differently, feel about them differently, respond to them differently, but they are the facts. And I would just say if the state is reluctant to do Houston's work, then let's send it back to Houston and Austin and Dallas, El Paso, Fort Worth, Galveston, San Antonio. It's really that simple. I want to be very clear, by all means, we need to continue the work of the State Pension Review Board. We need to make sure it has the sufficient information, transparency, and authority to ensure that whatever level of benefit or type of plan chosen by a community, the plan is solvent, the entities funding it responsibly, and the present and future retirees are protected. That alone should be the state's role in this local financial matter. We also need to protect the plans and agreements in place so nobody moves the goalposts during the game. A deal is a deal, but let's send these plans home. As a state legislator, I've seen bills. We have approved bills to let people noodle for catfish, ride motorcycles without helmets, and marry the person they choose at 18. Shouldn't we let them determine what to pay their employees? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And by the way, you had one of my absolute favorite bills last session with HB 2608, and it was not because it would have restored local pension reform. It was actually because it fit on one page. It was just a short paragraph of bill language, so thank you for that. Our next panelist is one of my favorite pension sparring partners and definitely has a good grasp on the issue, even though we may not agree on it. Max Patterson is the Executive Director of the Texas Association of Public Employees Retirement Systems. Prior to joining TexPERS, he was the Executive Director of the Houston Firefighters Relief and Retirement Fund. Please help me welcome Mr. Max Patterson.
Thank you very much, Jim. I want to commend those of you that are here today. I want to say that pensions is a very complex and confusing subject. It's not easy to understand, and I wish the room was a lot more full. I was here yesterday on local control, and it was standing room only, but I guess pensions is never a sexy subject, but thanks for being here. I have a number of slides, and because of time, unfortunately, I'm going to be going through them fairly quickly, but I will be around at the end to answer more questions and provide any additional information that you may have. Basically, I'm going to talk about three key things that keep coming up, and they're unfunded liabilities, amortization periods, and the fiscal health of pension funds that are in state statute that you hear about. And then just sum it up at the end about our take on DC plans that have been, DB plans that have been switched to DC plans in other states. Here's one headline that we studied. And yes, there are $57 billion worth of public pension plan problem. But we looked at that problem, and what does that really tell us? First, we, along with the Pension Review Board, don't agree that unfunded liabilities are the best measure of pension fund health for the following reasons. Unfunded liabilities is not a debt. There's no interest accruing on it, and the total payment is not needed next year or the following year. It's not something you have to pay down right away. In unfunded liabilities, that number changes. It changes for various reasons. It goes up and it goes down. In the 4 statewide pension funds, the big systems, they account for almost 80% of that $57 billion. In TexPERS, we primarily focus on the local pension systems, not the big statewide systems. We do not represent them, but I want to point out that if you look at the teachers' retirement system, which is the largest state pension fund, and it has $32 billion in unfunded liability, is under control considering the benefits paid, the returns, and the total assets. And thanks to the legislature addressing that problem. 12 local pension systems in 7 of Texas' largest cities account for 14% of that $57 billion. So the 4 statewide and the 12 largest local pension systems account for 93% of the $57 billion. There are 77 other local pension systems which account for just 7% of that total unfunded liability. This is hardly an unmanageable situation. As we shall see, their ability to handle their liabilities are similar to the teachers' retirement system. The Texas Pension Review Board says that amortization periods, not unfunded liabilities, are the best way to assess pension funds' health. We examined the assertion that 25% of pension plans are underwater or plan on running out of money. That is not the case. Monitoring the trends of several different measures is a better way to assess pension fund health. We looked at the 5-year trend in amortization periods. Texas state and local pensions made significant improvements in decreasing their amortization periods in 2015. Overall, they are the healthiest they've ever been in 5 years. We can't go through every shift, but the following slides show a few highlights. The most important development was the 53% decrease of 8 pension funds moving out of the infinite category. That certainly is not a plan to run out of money. 4 plans moved to the Pension Review Board's recommended amortization period of less than 25 years. 34 plans are in this category. And remember that only 7 are in the infinite category. Overall, this does not indicate a failed system. The number of plans with amortization periods of 0 years is better than it has been in recent history. We are in agreement about wanting to see all amortization periods at 0 years, just like we would want all private sector 401ks to average at least $1 million. But unfortunately, that average is down around 92,000. Finally, we don't believe it is accurate to say that the pension funds in state statute are exhibiting signs of stress. According to a survey that we did, 7 of 11 of those pension funds beat their assumed rates of return with their critical 20-year average investment return rates. Using Pension Review Board data, we found that 9 of 11 pension funds improved their amortization periods, and the 2 that declined only worsened 1.6 years combined. 2 studies support Texper's view that defined benefit plans should remain part of the 3-legged stool for retirement income, with defined contribution plans and Social Security. But unfortunately, many cities don't participate in Social Security, so defined benefit plans is all that they have. A few years ago, Texper asked an actuary to use real employee demographic data to compare costs of defined benefit and defined contribution plans in Austin, Houston, and San Antonio. The National Institute of Retirement Security has studied 3 states which switched to defined contribution plans for some portion of their workforce. All have experienced significant cost increases, and 2 have backtracked. Remember that failures to generate retirement security for any group of employees can add costs to social safety nets. In summary, the data shows that Texas state and local pension funds are in very good financial condition. We chalk that up to the fact that most offer modest pension benefits and most have received good financial support from their sponsors. We believe that calls for local control of those pension funds in statute are misguided based on the financial performance of those systems. Local control could produce unintended consequences. We hope that you will see that the need to maintain a statewide system of autonomous pension funds that have succeeded for the better part of 75 years. This is a model that has developed over time and works to the benefit of city and state employees and their employers and employees. There is no question that you will find that maybe in Houston and Dallas, you may have an isolated problem of a pension system that's having problems. But we feel that in those cases, you should address that problem at that city. Don't take that city and say that that exhibits a problem that's statewide, and therefore you make a change in the law that affects every pension system across the state. Address the problem in that local jurisdiction, and I think that that's a better approach rather than trying to take a statewide approach to it. Thank you.
I'm flattered, Max. I'm glad to know somebody is reading my articles that I crank out. Well, I have been absorbing fiscal knowledge from our next panelist since a young 26-year-old James Quintero joined TPPF many, many years ago. Bob Williams is the president of State Budget Solutions. He's the founder and senior fellow of the Freedom Foundation. He's currently a private sector chair of ALEC. Please help me welcome Mr. Bob Williams.
Well, Representative Murphy described the problem that we're having in local governments. My background is I used to be a CPA, used to be a government auditor back in Washington, D.C. with the Pentagon and Post Office. But nothing in that experience prepared me for the state of Washington when I became a state legislator and a lack of fiscal accountability. I just wish we could get every state to go to generally accepted accounting principles rather than GAAP. A big difference in the world. But let's imagine here in Texas that at the local government, we had a pension system where government pensions were secure with at least annual transparency. Let's imagine that the employee or the retiree was in control of their retirement plan. Let's imagine that the employer met the annual contribution for pensions, that funding was protected for other services, that it was fair to all, and the solution was sustainable. Can you imagine that in this state? You have it. You have it. 3 counties, Galveston, Brazoria, and Matagorda, have that. Now, it's interesting, in Galveston, the police and firemen are excluded from that system, and they're in deep trouble right now. But what's the difference? By the way, you have that for higher education faculty. It's a voluntary program. Let's do voluntary for everybody. 40% of your higher education faculty are on a defined contribution. And they say, oh, the employee won't be able to invest. Well, there's TIA Craft and there's other things that do an effective job of investing. You don't hear much, do you, in the legislature from higher education faculty? It's portable, it's transferable. You can go from one higher education institute to another in terms of moving ahead on that area. Well, let's talk briefly about the problems with the defined benefit system, and Max and I would disagree a little, I guess, on this. But it was interesting, when I was a Washington State legislator, we had 149 legislators, and there was 1 Democrat and 1 Republican, myself, interested in pensions. And whenever we would go before the Ways and Means Committee to present our reports, they would walk out. They wanted to kick the ball ahead. Let's not talk about it. Do you know that none of your Texas pension public plans employ a funding policy consistent with the Society of Actuaries Blue Ribbon Panel on pension funds, and then tie that to budget risk? It's one of the things I urge the legislature to do for all the public pension plans in the state. Use the Society of Actuaries report and tie it to. What do I mean by that? If you do nothing else, you can continue your highly optimistic rate of return estimates, but at least require a rate of return assumptions based primarily on the current risk-free rate. Show the comparison of those, because that's where you're going. I'm going to cite in a few minutes some public pension plans that were secure. No one worried about them until they went bankrupt. Houston's heading in that direction. The amortization of gains or losses, according to this report, should be completed over a period of no more than 15 to 20 years. I noticed some of your police and firemen are 55 years. Ooh. Asset smoothing should be limited to 5 years or less. You know, your city and county personnel believe their pensions are secure. In Detroit, they believe the same thing. When they went through bankruptcy, they found that their checks were shrunk by 6.7% for 12,000 retirees beginning in March. Making matters worse, you had this optional system where you could invest in, and the city guaranteed a certain rate of return, and the bankruptcy judge said that's too high. You have to repay it. I'll give you an example of David Espy, age 58. He was required to repay the city $75,000 in extraordinary gains in a lump sum. While meanwhile, his pension of $3,226 was cut by $216. And if he didn't repay it in a lump sum, that's okay, he could charge it, 7.5% interest a year. In addition, in Pritchard, Alabama, the city was heading into bankruptcy. They went to the bankruptcy judge, and the bankruptcy judge said, pay the pensioners first, and then whatever you have left over, do police and fire and public services. The city said, no, we're going to do essential public services first. There's no money left for the pensioners. For 2 years, they didn't get any pensions. Central Falls, Rhode Island, Washington Park, Illinois. Public employees have seen their retirement benefit cut. You know, you have 3 cities that have among the heaviest tax burden for debt, and again, I call unfunded pensions debt. Dallas, number 2 in the nation, Houston, number 3, and San Antonio, number 4. One of the things that we see quite frequently on pensions is rosy actuarial estimates of earning 7.5% or 8%. In California, they raised the estimate because they wanted to put less money into pensions. Tell me where I can put my money and be guaranteed 7.5% interest. The problem on pension reform, and I've fought this battle for years, I have the facts, but facts don't win, stories do. And that's what we overlook. And for too often, many of us who might call ourselves conservatives or libertarians blame the public employee workers. The workers are not at fault. It's the legislators or the county commissioners or the city council people or the unions who have given those benefits. So we need to engage the workers. We need to address the workers and talk about, we want to keep the promises made to public employees. The benefits you earned, you're going to get. Now, if there's some slush funds or whatever it is, the $1 million buyout you get in Houston, if you're a police or fireman, that goes away. But there should be immediate vesting of the pension system. The best solution is talk to employees and say, we're going to keep the pensions you earned. We're going to keep our community safe and strong. It means we're not going to have to lay off police or firemen, or in Detroit, or in Chicago, 350 teachers laid off this year because they don't have enough money to pay the pensions. And we're going to keep politicians out of your retirement. You know, every time I mention that, even though I'm a former one, boy, the state employees get really happy if they're not going to be playing games with the system. There is an urgent need, I believe, to go to the defined contribution plan. It works well in your 3 counties in the state. It works well for higher education. It works well in other states. Because if you go to the defined contribution plan, it has immediate vesting, there's a full range of opportunities for investing, and there's full access to funds under federal law. The employee's in charge. Imagine that. What a concept. Now, if you can't get the votes to go to defined contribution, I understand the problem of going to defined contribution, but again, I would do some videos. I would do a video of a firefighter in Galveston versus the public employee in Galveston, or a higher education family where one is in defined contribution K-12 system and the other is in higher education 401k situation, and show the difference what's happening on that. But I think if you can't get there, the other reforms that I believe are non-negotiable is set predictable employer contributions and cap existing and future liabilities. No loopholes. We're not going to dig the hole any deeper. Now, what's negotiable if you go to a 401k or a cash balance or a hybrid or a defined benefit with risk-free rate of return, those are negotiable in terms of that. But the other thing that needs to be done is to eliminate the double dipping the use of base pay only for computer retirement. I'm amazed in California how many retirees are getting 20 or 30% more in retirement than they ever got as a full-time employee. Or in Washington State, we have these public utility districts. In the last 2 years, they never take any vacation. And so then that goes into their final pay and goes up in terms of that. The fiscal danger of no action, I believe I've told you what's happening around the country. So the solutions, in your case, the legislature needs to return control of the local retirement plans to local governments. It's interesting, when I did a media search of Houston, and I found Houston city council members blame the legislature for not giving them control. The legislature blames the city for not giving them a plan. That's pretty good. The problem is not going to be solved. Put the onus back where it belongs, on local government. I also applaud your governor's decision to appoint Josh McGee to the State Pension Review Board. I know there's some unhappiness about that, but that's going to make a major difference in terms of accountability and what happens on pensions. The federal judge who presided over Detroit's bankruptcy urged 3 steps for other public entities to avoid municipal bankruptcies. 1, make your pension payments. And maybe that's something else the legislature would require, is to make the ARC, even though the ARC's not in GASB anymore. Make sure you're calculating your unfunded pension liability correctly. And the judge points out that many entities use higher assumed discount rate to lower their liabilities. Now, in Washington State 4 years ago, we had an unbelievable case where the legislature didn't want to put more money into pensions, so they assumed that state employees would work for the state longer, and then when they retire, they die in the first 2 years. The problem is, most legislators don't know these key assumptions, and they're not visible. And I would urge that be in the budget too, the key assumptions for the pensions. And then the third thing, the judge said, think about the model that we're using for public pensions. Is it correct? He suggests you move to defined contribution level. As pension costs rise, state and local governments must impose some version of austerity budget by raising taxes, slashing services, or increasing debt. Serious pension reform will improve state budgeting process. It will relieve the financial distress. It will improve government performance and enhance equity among workers. Thank you.
Excellent presentations, gentlemen. Why don't we move to audience Q&A at this time? Does anybody have a question? You start right here in the front. We've got a roving mic here coming around.
Hold on. Pension Review Board does in Texas. If somebody could explain that, I'd appreciate it. The other thing is, I know Mr. Patterson mentioned about the high cost of, defined expenses of defined contribution plans for 401ks. I think there's some legitimate issues there. If you go to TIA-CREF, which is just a wonderful system, very productive, low cost, and good returns over, 50, 60, 70 years, whatever the long they've been in existence. Why would that not be a good model, having those kind of, we might call it a super pool of, funded professional managers, lowering costs and hopefully getting better returns? So.
I guess as you look ahead, it'd be great to get 7.5% interest ahead. If anybody looks at what's going on in the economy, if you really expect you're going to get 7.5% interest over the you look at the states over the last year, not too many states were as fortunate as Texas on their rate of return. It's not going to happen. It simply won't happen. Defined contribution, what's the opposite to it? The private sector's moved there. Even in my state, Washington State, heavy union state, the militant, I call them militant, the very liberal Boeing Machinists Union voted to go to the defined contribution model.
Yeah, I'll just mention in terms of the assumptions that go into a plan. I mean, there are many. Retirement age is one of those. How long they'll live is another one of those. So you have to err on the side of making sure there are enough funds there. So all these different factors contribute to a really steep slope on a contribution rate. Max and I are talking about many entities don't make the contribution they should. The actuarially retired contribution turns out to be about half of what's often necessary in the plan because of the assumptions on return rates. Those who follow pensions may have noticed in Congress, Puerto Rico is trying to get a bailout. And the feds are looking at maybe your rate of return ought to be what treasuries are doing today. In other words, like 3.5 instead of 7.5, which takes plans that are, underfunded by, 20 billion and makes them underfunded by 40 billion. So it's a pretty cataclysmic change that may show up in state accounting, which will be a pretty hard thing to address. But the Pension Review Board is really key for us in Texas. It tells your local, Longview city employee, you can look up and make sure, where are they in terms of their fund balances, their accounting, their amortization period, all that data, not all the data. Much of the data we showed you today comes from them. And that's where your average Texas worker who's out there in some city can go, yeah, I'm in a good plan, or I'm not, and can take some action.
On the assumption rate, a number of plans have been coming down, but what's keeping some of those assumption rates up is as the pension fund ratchets down that assumption rate, it increases the liability on the part of the city. And then in the city, it makes the problem on the city side even worse. And so you have the pressure from the city saying, don't change it. And so you have that dichotomy that's going on. And so how they're going to get beyond that. And then the other issue with going from the DB to the DC, what a lot of people don't realize, and particularly in the police and the fire side, is there's a benefit that's provided in a defined benefit that you don't have in a DC, and that's a disability. If you have a policeman or a firefighter to go out on a disability, that's a major benefit, and you'll lose that when you go to the DC side.
I believe we had a question right here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know where to start, but, oh, okay. It's kind of weird. But the global picture I really look at as a policy issue is let's look at Texas. A lot of these examples are where things were done incorrectly. And the things that were done incorrectly is that the people didn't pay their debt at the local level. And sometimes cities, because of political expediency, they want to spend that money today on their pet projects. They want to do some ribbon cuttings and have their names on buildings. If they have this money and they're not told by state law that they're going to have to pay so much along with the employee, it's not going to be done. That's the reason we have state oversight. I took offense that I can't, Mr. Murphy, that you say you have people on a committee that are disinterested. If you're disinterested, you shouldn't be sitting at the Capitol building if you're sitting on a committee. We need you guys to have oversight. So either pensions don't act irresponsibly or the cities don't. You need that oversight. I will tell you, you look around the country, you don't have issues with policing. That's a big issue right now going on. You don't have that here in Texas. Why? Because this is a huge benefit that attracts, it recruits, and it retains people in those organizations 25, 30 years. We don't want a portable employee like they have in institutions of higher learning. That costs municipalities tons of money to rehire, retrain. It's a direct correlation to the recruitment and retention of good professional people. If these benefits go away, KD bar the door. You go to DC plans and fire and police services, it's going to be chaos in this state. I can guarantee you that. You have professional policing, professional teachers, and professional firefighters in this state. We do it better than every other state. I'm proud of this state. I'm proud of the job our legislative committee does up there. They're not disinterested. Like I said, if that's the case, let's put everything at the local level. Why doesn't the city, we'll take over standards to what it takes to be a police officer. We'll get rid of T-close. Why don't we do our own driver's licenses at the local level? If you're going to go local level, do it all the way across the board. But we do need state oversight, unfortunately. We do, because people don't act responsibly a lot of times at the local level.
Chairman?
Yeah, to answer your question, no, just kidding. A couple of different things you bring up that I think need to be examined. I think that's the disinterested. What I mean by that, very specifically, is none of these legislators directly are going to pay for any of these benefits that they're mandating, right? You know, you're from Longview, you're voting on a plan for Dallas. So that's what I mean by that. No, I'm really happy we have the Pension Review Board to give oversight, and they will tell you what cities have to contribute, and then the cities don't, and that's why we have these billion-dollar deficits at these pension plans. So if that's the system that you're advocating that works, I would submit that it doesn't. So I want to be clear about that. You know, the idea of local control, no city council, I believe, is going to be cavalier or negligent and not want to keep people hired and working as public employees. They're in the market. They understand what it takes to hire, attract, and to keep good people. And one of the things I was very clear on, nobody who has an existing plan should earn their benefits should see any type of a loss. That's not what we're advocating. But the notion is the people who pay for and receive the services should decide how that works, not people from across the state.
Representative.
Thank you. So in commenting on your comments, it kind of makes me think of what one of my pastors said, give unto God what is God and to Caesar what is Caesar, Caesar being the government. Okay, what government are we talking about? One of the big discussions as we talk about this panel is, I said I would prefer to change to being smart on pensions. But in talking about the concept of local control, limited government, in that building, every time we give a speech, every time we vote, we talk local control, limited government. But let's talk about the specific conversation we're having. And we can use several examples, but let's start off with Houston. We had tons of discussion about local control as it relates to Houston. In the Pensions Committee, we said, okay, Houston, you guys need to have a conversation as it relates to the way the process is right now. So what happened is Houston did not come to an agreement to present to the legislature, so we didn't approve it. But let me tell you how the process works in Austin at the Capitol, and I've been there 18 years now, is yes, we are a state legislature, but when it relates to local issues like Houston, we defer to the Houston members. When it relates to San Antonio, we defer to the San Antonio member. When it relates to the Dallas area, we defer to the Dallas. Is there a statute that says there? No. But what do? We defer. And I'll tell you this, for example, as it relates to Houston, I know the term was used disinterested, and Representative Chairman Murphy explained it. But I can tell you, when it came to Houston, every single member from Houston was very involved, just like San Antonio. In addition, I'll tell you, there's 3 ways to participate in this process. You can be for something, against something, or not participate. But that not participation is a big participation. The other part I'll tell you is this. If you don't like what the Houston members are doing, with the exception, of course, of Chairman Murphy, get rid of them. If you don't like the San Antonio, likewise. And I'll tell you, I have had that experience. I was here 4 years, and then, like I mentioned earlier, I took a vacation, and I kind of was able to convince folks. But we do have, I can tell you personally, and as I said, I'm a Democrat, okay? But we defer strongly to how the local folks feel about what is affecting their area. Lastly, I'll talk briefly about the judge and defined contributions that he commented. We prefer, I think, that we be involved in making those decisions instead of a judge doing it to determine whether it's defined contribution, and I could mention a couple other issues, but I think I make my point.
I think there's a lot of fear of what a defined contribution model is versus what it actually is. Talk to your higher education faculty that are in it. Talk to those 3 counties I mentioned that are in it. Defined contribution works very well. It's working very well in the private sector. The second thing is you mentioned K-12 teachers. Do you realize that 40% of the teachers in your state don't work long enough to vest in the system? Some of them may work 8 years, and they leave. 40% of your teachers. And what do they get back? Just the money they put in. They don't get back any of the school district money. Is that fair? Why not put them in defined contribution where they earn money day one and move ahead in terms of doing that?
We have a question right here, and we'll go to you next.
Yeah, let me second the last comment that was made there. I worked in Colorado as a college professor for 8 years, and I was in the state retirement program. And when I left, they gave me my money that I had put in, not their contribution, and no return on even my half. I really got screwed. So when I came to teach at Texas A&M, I've taught in Texas for 34 years before I retired, I absolutely wanted to do the not the defined benefit, but the defined contribution. And most of the faculty there do that. I think people who will take the time to study it will conclude that has, for many reasons, I think it's a more attractive option. And given the situation in most states and many municipalities today, I don't want to trust my retirement 30 years down the road to these plans because I don't trust the politicians to do the right thing. And when I retired, all of my money, it was my money, and I don't care what happens to the state of Texas or College Station or whatever. And I'm very thankful for that. And if I died by accident a few years after I got killed, after I retired, I have lots of money that would go to my wife, to my children, and so forth. I think it's a much, much better situation. I don't think it's a step down. I honestly think it's a step up. If you want to go work one place for 50 years, then maybe the state retirement program is for you. But I think for a lot of people, I didn't want those handcuffs. Thank you.
Yes, sir, in the back.
David Hoyer from Houston. There's a huge disconnect here. I mean, Houston is insolvent, okay? This year, we're not going to be able to fill potholes because the municipal pensions, in particular the fireman's pension, have no obligation to meet with the city government whatsoever. And now the current tab is a $5 billion hole. So, and I come here to Austin and I hear people like Mr. Patterson say, well, Houston should just fix its own problem. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. Like I just said, they have no obligation to do anything. All of it comes through Austin. Okay? Austin needs to fix this problem. Thank you, Mr. Williams, for your understanding of the problem. So my question is for Mr. Murphy. Do you think, I come up here and people have no idea. In particular legislators, they're like, oh, well, it's that gay mayor's fault that you have, or something like that. So my question is the legislature finally coming around to understanding the situation, and are we going to get a fix in the next session, or is the city going to have to go bankrupt a la Detroit before Austin gets it? Thank you.
Well, to kind of rephrase your question, is this something that's ready for a legislative solution? I thought so a year ago. I'm not so sure now. It's something that two things have to occur, and Roberto, I know, will concur with this, which is one, it has to be understood as a problem. Everyone has to say, wow, that's really a problem. And it's not just Houston, as I mentioned, it's San Antonio, it's Fort Worth, it's Dallas. Houston may be the canary in the coal mine, but the others are not far behind. And when you consider it as a percentage of their budgets, in fact, I've got a report here from Moody's that says, people might say, well, at least we aren't Detroit. No, Detroit's at number 17. We've got numbers 6, 8, 11, and 2 on the list. So Detroit is actually ahead of us in some of these metrics. So first, people have to understand it's a problem and that it's a state problem. And that's the big part. Well, Jim, it's a Houston thing, or it's a Dallas thing, or it's a Fort Worth thing. Why are all of us having to go through this? Good heavens. It's because we took over their plans years ago. That's why. And then the other thing, it has to compete with all the other ideas for bills in the legislature. As Chris Griesel once told me, the legislature's never short of ideas, just good ideas. And so there's a lot of competition going on every session. And so, we're going to work hard to get something moving. I can promise hard work, not results, and we'll see. It's a tough hill to climb.
Yeah, I'll just add to Chairman Murphy's comment. It's true. First, you got to understand what the issue is, the problem. One of the things that we did in the legislature relates to the teacher retirement, state employees. Hey, we got to deal with it. It took us a few years, and to finally we decided, yes, this was 2 years ago. We dealt with the teacher retirement. This year, we dealt with the state employees. What did we do? Part of what we did in the state employees is one of the discussions that was had earlier was we hadn't been putting money into the plan. And as you recall, 2003, as you mentioned, Chairman, people came out with a great idea. There's no short of ideas. We let a whole bunch of people go, state employees. So guess what? They also stopped paying into the employee retirement. And then a few years later, we get it. So there's an issue. Then we gotta come to a discussion and get something done. And I mentioned earlier, I will repeat, if at the local level they come to an agreement, and I tell you, we defer to the state legislators, and Chairman Murphy can tell you, they come to an understanding, they come to an agreement, sometimes they, and what we do is defer to them. So I think even at this point, there's a way to work the local process from what I've observed through the years.
I believe we had a question right here.
Okay. Oh, you're going to hold it? Thank you. Thank you. First of all, this discussion about defined contribution or defined benefit, they're both great plans. It's how they're structured and funded, and the accounting process is the issue. Now, in regards to city, I've been on the Dallas School Board, I've been mayor, I've been TML, been national stuff. But in the accounting process, on the local level, I have never seen a line item under general accounting principles where it shows the unfunded portion for a city or a school district's benefit plan. I think communications is a big thing because the citizens would like to know what their liability is towards these plans. They have no idea. How would you go about correcting this issue? I may be wrong.
Panel?
It's buried in the footnotes of the CAFR. It is there, but you almost have to be an accounting expert to know where to go find it.
Right. Yeah, the blended accounting form of government is Byzantine at best. I would just say, I think the PRB can, through rule, help specify data to provide that kind of transparency. And I think we just need to have some conversations with them. And I just really want to quickly piggyback the gentleman from Houston. All of you, if you're interested in this, need to be talking to your legislator so they understand it's an issue to their constituents. So I want to make sure we're clear on that.
Yes, sir.
My question is for Mr. Williams. 3 parts, but they're quick. What did Enron do better than state public plans to protect the retirement benefits of their employees, or Lehman or Countrywide? How do we make up the difference in paying down unfunded liabilities when we remove active member contributions and close the plan? And then thirdly, how exactly will Mr. McGee make a difference in accountability on the PRB and why?
So let's take that one at a time. So can you repeat that
Sure.
first question, Bob?
First question is, what did Enron do better than state public plans to protect the retirement benefits of their employees, or Lehman Brothers or Countrywide?
Nothing. But the problem is, you're public officials here, and you're expected to protect them. And right now, they're not being protected. And you just have to look at the cities I mentioned. Cities are much more vulnerable than states.
Real quick, question number 2.
Question 2 is, how do we make up the difference in paying down unfunded liabilities when you remove active member contributions and close the plan?
When you're in a hole, stop digging. So stop making the hole deeper. You go to defined contribution, you're not digging any deeper, then you can put money into that to pay down that debt over the amortization period. but at least you're not digging the hole any deeper. Right now, you're digging deeper. Every day, you're digging deeper. And one of the things that happens is some of these local governments that don't have much money can't give the raise they want to give, so they give increased benefits that are not funded.
And then real quick, last question.
Last question, and I'll tell you on the member contribution part, if you remove member contributions, there's a certain percentage of that member contribution that's paying down unfunded liability. So when you remove it, you're actually taking money away from the plan. The third part is, how exactly will Mr. McGee make a difference in accountability on the PRB and why?
Bob, this is related to Josh McGee and how he might make a difference on the PRB.
I think he completely understands pension and pension funding, and I believe that he will give some leadership to the board, coming up with some more guidance for pensions. For example, implement the actuary report, fund the annual required contribution to pensions, et cetera.
I believe we have time for one or two more questions. Yes, sir.
Tell us what percent of the budget is going to these pension plans in both Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio?
Sir, the only number I had was Houston's number, and it was 15% was what the CAFR showed last year. So that's, I don't have the data on the others, but we can get it to you. If you'll see me afterwards, and all of us will be available afterwards, we'll find that out for you. And one of the misleading things about pension health is you might say our plan's fully funded. Well, if you throw enough money into it, of course, right? It'll be very healthy. That doesn't mean it's proper or appropriate or commensurate, with need or with the market. So those are important things to kind of bear in mind. The city of Houston has record revenues right now. It's never had more money than it has today. It's rich, but it's spending money where we don't get our police cadets hired, we don't get our potholes filled, we're shutting down libraries. That's the crowd out effect I talked about. But we'll happily talk to you about that.
Sir, one right here. And then we'll wrap it up with that last question.
Actually, I have two questions, and I don't know which one's most important. But the first one is real easy. Any comment on net cash flow as a measure of pension health? You talked about the duration.
You're talking about return on investment?
The net, so for instance, TMRS through September 30th, paid out $600 million more than they took in.
Okay, I see what
So
you're
that's a
saying.
net cash flow.
Right.
How is that a good measure for health of a pension fund? That's one thing. The other one is, what is the sentiment on how do you make these pension funds do a risk assessment of their investments and communicate that to the community, how much risk they are taking in things like private equity?
Real estate's good. Day job gets a plug.
You're asking complicated questions. A pension fund can basically, without getting in a lot of detail, they can stress test all of their investments and to see if they're putting too much risk on the entire portfolio. But I would say that most local plans do not do that. They don't stress test. You probably get it at your statewide plans, your larger plans. They have the professional staff to go out and do that sort of thing. I would say you probably do not get it done that much on the local level. Now, there might be some exceptions at your large major cities, but beyond that, you're not going to see that. And your first question, that number, that's going to fluctuate based on the hiring that goes on with the city. And it's going to go up and down as the city hires more employees. Particularly, if you look at Houston over the years have gone through a cycle where they have hired and then have laid off and then have hired back and then they have laid off. and it goes from one mayor to another mayor with the income that comes in, and unemployment. It goes through cycles, and in a lot of cities that happens. And I'm going to add that, and I want to say something. I grew up in the city of Detroit, so I'm thinking about this reference to Detroit. I hate it when people make comparisons to Detroit when they talk about pensions. Detroit went down because of corruption and stealing, and people went to jail because of it. It was not a pension problem. So don't drag Detroit in when you're talking about pensions, because it was just a bunch of politicians who were thieves, and they spent a lot of money that wasn't theirs, and they gave it to their buddies, and a lot of them all went to jail for it. But it was not the pension. And in the city has a major spending problem, and it's not just the pension. They have really gone into a lot of debt, and they've gone out and borrowed a lot of money, and I wish the new mayor a lot of help, but he's got a big problem in trying to figure out how to balance that budget, because it's hard to say to the general public, you know, I'm not going to fix that park up anymore, and I'm not going to do this, and I'm not going to do that, and we're going to have to put a stop to it because we have to rein in the budget, and that's what's going to have to be done.
Let's field one last question. I'm getting the hook, so panel, if we can keep the answer brief, we'll get out of here.
Well, it's, I guess, more of a kind of a closing thought, maybe. One of the big challenges in this discussion is, as in most policy discussions, is understanding what the facts are. And I would make a statement of argument that the walls in this room are brown. And it is a fact. And I don't think anyone can deny that I can state as a fact the walls in this room are brown. But is that a accurate description or portrayal of color of this room, if that's what I'm trying to do? And so one of the challenges in this subject is really understanding what are the facts. And many people throw out facts. I've heard it for quite some time. But understanding the relationship of those facts and the importance of those facts as it relates to the context of the question at hand. I think it's very appropriate that the walls in this room are brown, but is that an issue? Is that important related to the description of the color of this room? A couple other things related to higher education. There was a lot of discussion about TIA CREF. Higher education, especially in the public safety sector. Public safety sector really doesn't have the luxury of working a little longer if the markets don't turn out well. It's not practical to have a 60, 65-year-old firefighter out on the streets. And it's really not that practical to have a 60, 65-year-old cop out chasing bad guys. So there is that consideration more specifically to public safety than general administration.
And with that, I'm sorry, sir, we're going to have to leave it there, but I want to thank our panel today and let you know that this conversation is going to continue on the Texas Public Policy's Think Local Liberty website, just launched this week. I encourage you guys to go there, like it on Facebook. Please help me thank today's panel.